The Christmas Mystery, the 10th of December. A few seconds later, what Elizabeth had thought was a bird took off and flew down in a spiral toward the pilgrims. Joachim woke up and opened the 10th door in the magic advent calendar. Today there was a picture of an angel at the top of a church tower. Out of the calendar fell the scrap of paper folded over and over. Joachim unfolded it and began to read. Imperial. It happened at Paderborn at the end of the 13th century. Into the little town halfway between Hanover and Cologne rushed a frisky flock of sheep, followed by 2 shepherds, a black king, a little girl, and an angel with wings outspread. It was early in the morning before the town was awake. Only a night watchman was out on the streets. He called out sternly to the 2 shepherds who were chasing their flock of sheep through the town. The next moment he caught sight of the angel hovering above the cobblestones. Then he raised his arms to the sunrise and exclaimed, "Hallelujah, hallelujah!" Whereupon he retreated round a corner and left the streets to the godly procession. They stopped in front of a church in the middle of the town. "That's St. Bartholomew's Church," said Epheriel. "It was built in the 11th century and is called after one of Jesus' 12 apostles. It is told of Bartholomew that he journeyed all the way to India to tell the Indians about Jesus." Elizabeth noticed something strange. She pointed up at the spire on the church tower. "There's a white bird sitting up there," she said. Epheriel smiled. "If only there were," he said. A few seconds later, what Elizabeth had thought was a bird took off and flew down in a spiral toward the pilgrims. She realized that the bird wasn't a bird after all. What had been sitting on the church spire was an angel, but it was not a grown angel. It was no larger than she was herself. The child angel alighted at Elizabeth's feet. "Wonderful," he exclaimed. "My name is Imperial and I'm coming with you to Bethlehem." He whirled around a bit, peered up at Caspar and the 2 shepherds, and then looked up at Epheriel and said, "I've been waiting for a quarter of an eternity." Caspar stood thinking. It was obvious that he had something on his mind. "A quarter of an eternity," he began. "That's about 66,289 years, or about 156,498 years, or more exactly 439,811,977 years and 4 seconds, or perhaps a little more. It's not easy to say how long a quarter of an eternity lasts, for you have to find out how long a whole eternity lasts. Then you can divide it by 4. But exactly how long an eternity lasts is very difficult to calculate. No matter which number you start with, eternity will last even longer. So no one can say what a quarter of an eternity is as long as a whole eternity. Even 1,000th of an eternity is really just as long as a whole of the rest of eternity. This is extremely difficult to understand, for calculating whole or half eternities is a matter for heaven alone. The angel Imperial looked offended. "But I've been sitting on the top of the church tower for hours," he said. "Very possibly, but that's not the same as sitting there for a quarter of an eternity," said Caspar. To avoid a quarrel between the wise man and the cherub, and not just a quarter of a quarrel, Joshua struck the cobblestones with his crook and said, "To Bethlehem, to Bethlehem." They set off through the town and out along the roads and cattle trails. Imperial sprang in front of the 5 sheep, so the pilgrimage was guarded by an angel at both ends. They saw many towns and villages, but didn't stop until they came to the Roman colonial city of Cologne, on the bank of the river Rhine. Epheriel had explained that their route through Europe had been planned so that they should be seen by as few people as possible. Angel Time says it's 1272 years after Christ. He said, they've begun building the great cathedral of Cologne, but it won't be finished for hundreds of years. Joshua banged his crook. To Bethlehem, to Bethlehem. Imperial said, glorious countryside, isn't it? We're going up the Rhine Valley. There are fortresses and castles, steep vineyards and Gothic cathedrals, dandelions and rhubarb. They hurried along the bank of the biggest river Elizabeth had ever seen. The valley became narrower and narrower, and the mountains higher and higher. They ran past small towns and villages. Out on the river floated an occasional barge. As they sped through the beautiful landscape, Elizabeth turned toward Ephriel and asked whether he had met Imperial before. All angels in heavens have known each other through all eternity, said Ephriel, laughing. Are there an awful lot of you? Yes, a whole lot. How can you know all of each other then? We've had a whole eternity to get to know each other, you see. It is a very long time. Elizabeth had to think hard so as to understand what Ephriel meant. The angel explained a bit more. If you have a party that lasts for 3 hours, you shouldn't invite more than 5 or 6 guests, and then everyone will be able to talk to everyone else. But if the party lasts for 3 whole days, you can easily have 50 or more guests. Elizabeth nodded. She had discussed this with Mama when it was her birthday. So, she said, the heavenly party has lasted for all eternity, said Ephriel. Do all the angels have different names? Of course, otherwise we wouldn't call out to each other. Otherwise we wouldn't have been persons either. And Ephriel began to say all the angels' names one after the other. The angels in heaven are called Ariel, Burial, Curacle, Daniel, Ephriel, Fabiel, Gabriel, Emmanuel, Michael, Nariel. That's enough, said Elizabeth. How long would it take you to say all the angel names? Oh, I would have to go on for all eternity. That's pretty good going to remember all names by heart, said Elizabeth. With all of eternity at your disposal, it's not so difficult, and I think it's very clever to think up so many different names, all ending in L, Elizabeth went on. Ephriel nodded. God's imagination is infinite, just as there are indefinitely many stars in the sky. No angel is exactly like another, nor are humans either. You can make 1,000 identical machines, but they're so easy to make that even a human can do it. Finally, the angel Ephriel spoke some words that Elizabeth hid in her heart. Every person on earth is a unique work of creation. Joachim sat smiling to himself. It had been so fun to read all about the angels. Suddenly he heard Mama on the landing. He didn't have time to hide the paper in the secret box, so he slipped it under his pillow. Mama leaned over the bed to peep in the calendar. An angel, she said, on a church tower. And then something stupid happened. Joachim forgot he wasn't supposed to talk about what he'd read. Perhaps it was because he was trying to remember all those strange angel names. He said, "That's the cherub Imperial." Mama stared at him. Imperial? Joachim nodded. He thought it was a nice name for his mischievous angel, so nice that he kept repeating it inside himself. He's sitting on top of St. Bartholomew's Church. He's been sitting there for a quarter of an eternity, but now he's about to take off and fly in a spiral down to Elizabeth and the others. Mama didn't answer Joachim. Instead, she called Papa. When he came into the room, she asked Joachim to tell him what the church in the picture was called. St. Bartholomew's Church, he said. Bartholomew went all the way to India and told the Indians about Jesus, but the church is in Germany. Mama and Papa stood staring at each other. I'll look it up in the encyclopedia, said Papa, then we'll find out. When he came back, he looked like a ghost, or at least as if he had met an angel or two on the landing. He's quite right. The town's called Paderborn, and there really is an old St. Bartholomew's church there. They were gazing at Joachim just as they had done last year when he ate nearly all the Christmas cookies the day before Christmas Eve. Papa took the magic advent calendar down from the wall and inspected it on both sides. Then he hung it up again. "How did you hear about Bartholomew, my lad?" asked Papa, "or about Paderborn for that matter?" "At school," said Joachim. "And are you telling the truth?" "Either you were allowed to tell lies about Christmas presents or you weren't." "Yes," whispered Joachim. Then they all ran out of time, so there was no more talk of Bartholomew, Imperial or Paderborn. Neither Mama nor Papa had time to make their sandwiches for lunch. Joachim's most important victory that morning was that he managed to hide a little piece of paper in his secret box before he ran off for school. He hid the key in the bookshelf. When he came home from school, Mama was there. She had opened his secret box. She had opened his secret box. Mama had done something she had promised she would never do. She had broken a solemn promise. She had done something that was as bad as opening other people's letters. On the dining table lay all 10 pieces of paper that Joachim had found in the magic advent calendar. He was furious. He was so angry with Mama that he wanted to hit her. "You promised me that the secret box was mine and that you'd never open it," he said. "So you told lies and you steal too." Then Papa came home. He had talked to Mama on the phone. It was he who had said she should try and find the key and open the secret box. They had to find out how Joachim knew so many strange names and used so many grown-up words. Joachim said they shouldn't have been allowed to have children, for people who tell lies to their children might suddenly begin to hit them as well, he said, and that was against the law. They could at least have waited until he came home from school and asked if they could open his box. Finally, he managed to say that he had hidden the scraps of paper because he wanted to pack them up and give them to Mama and Papa for Christmas. He said he'd thrown away the whole magic advent calendar. Then he began to cry. He rushed into his room and slammed the door behind him as hard as he could. He was never going to forgive them. He would never listen to them any more either. He would never believe them again, never. Joachim sat on his bed and tried to look up at the magic advent calendar, but his eyes were so wet that the colours slid into one another. He could no longer pick out the angels from the shepherds in the fields. Everything was spoiled. The advent calendar had suddenly become ordinary, like every other advent calendar. It wasn't the least bit magical anymore. After a long time, something began to sing in his ears, and the song he heard said, "Sebet tebas, sebet tebas, sebet tebas." It was such a mysterious song that he suddenly realised that perhaps it didn't make any difference whether Mama and Papa knew about the scraps of paper in the advent calendar. Perhaps the magic advent calendar was so full of secrets that there would be enough for the whole family. He had still not said that he had met John. That was something he had to himself. There was a knock at the door. Joachim didn't answer, but after a little while Papa cautiously opened the door. "It's true. We've been silly," he said. "Can you forgive us?" asked Mama. "Did you read what was on the secret pieces of paper?" asked Joachim. "I suppose I did," said Mama. "But you see, I don't know which piece came out of the calendar first. Maybe you can show us. Perhaps read it all to Papa." Joachim considered carefully. "All right then." He was a little relieved at what had happened, really. From now on, he had no need to hide anything. Besides, he would be able to ask Mama and Papa if there was something he didn't understand. From now on, the magic advent calendar would belong to the whole family. And that's the end of the chapter.